Welcome back to the channel. So last time we made these valves, made the intake and the exhaust valve. They're exactly the same. And then we made these keepers that go on the end here. And we made these pins that go in there. So once these valves go in here, then the keeper will go on the end. But the next thing we need is a spring to hold the keeper and hold the valve in there. So that's what we're going to work on next. Okay, so to make the springs, we've got dimensions here. The intake valve spring is an 18 thousandths wire diameter, 1/4 inch OD, 7/8 long, free length, 8 effective coils, and then a 1/4 inch compression, 6 ounces. I don't really have a way to measure that. The exhaust is 31 thousandths, so it's a thicker wire, 5/16 OD, larger OD, 1.1 long, so it's longer. Free length with 12 effective coils. So I've made some springs in the past, and the best way that I found to do it is I have special spring wire here, and the closest thing I've got is 19 and 30 thousandths. So it calls for 18, so this one's a little bigger, and it calls for 31. This one's a little bit smaller, but it's within the tolerance zone that we're working with, so we use this. And then if you do have spring wire, this is a good way that I found to keep it all from getting bent. It's a piece of PVC pipe, just water pipe, and a cork on the end. And then you can put your spring wire in there, and then that just helps keep it from getting bent. And then that keeps all the sizes separated. Just put a label on there. So I've got an assortment of different sizes for different springs. So we need a mandrel to put in the lathe in order to wind this spring. So our intake is 8 effective coils over 7/8. So we'll do some math and we'll figure out what that is per inch. We'll just do a ratio of 8 coils over 7/8, what that would be over an inch. We'll figure out what the pitch is. So then we can set up the lathe with the threading gears to what that pitch is. So if we engage the lathe, it'll move to what that pitch is going to be. And then the mandrel is a bit of trial and error. There are some calculators online that I have used to get a rough starting point. But it still is not an exact science. It depends on how much rebound you've got in the spring to get it just right. So I've got just an assortment of mandrels here that I've used in the past. So we'll start with one of these and see where we're at and see if we need something that's bigger or smaller. So the wire will actually, I've got a hole in here. So the wire will go into this hole. We'll put this into the chuck, and then I've got a tool that goes into the tailstock with a set screw on it that'll actually hold the wire and hold a little bit of tension against it. So with that tension against it, we'll manually go ahead and wrap a few coils here on the end, and we can trim those off if we need to, but we want a few that's wrapped flat. Then we can engage the lathe, and then it will move and then wrap the rest of these at the pitch that we want. So we need 8 coils over a 7/8 length. Then we'll stop it and then wrap a couple of coils that are straight. And then when we take it loose, it's gonna rebound. And then we want to end up with a 1/4 inch OD, and then it's an 18 thousandths wire, so we can figure out what that needs to be on the ID and measure it, see where we're at. And then if we need to adjust it, if it needs to be smaller, then we can turn this mandrel down, or if it needs to be bigger, I've got some bigger mandrels here that we can start with. And like I said, it'll just be a little bit of trial and error, and then getting the pitch right so that we get that 8 coils over to 7/8 length. So we'll get this set up in the lathe and see if we can turn a spring. Okay, so I got the springs wound. This is the first one that I did, and this was 19 thousandths wire, and it called for 18, and it did pretty good, but I felt like it was just a little bit too stiff. It's just pretty stiff, and that intake spring needs to be, it needs to be pretty soft because it's only vacuum with a piston going down, suction that opens it up. So the next size down that I had was some 15 thousandths. So I ended up winding this spring. I think this spring's going to work good. So again, use the mandrel, put it in there, and then this ended up being an 8 pitch. So I set the gears to 8 and then wound that. So we ended up with 8 coils. Sorry, 9 was the pitch. I wasn't sure if I could actually do 9, but I did have 9 on the gear chart. So 9 pitch, and then ended up with 8 coils over 7/8. And this is the mandrel that I used for this one. And then the OD ended up good. This mandrel's around 125, around 1/8 of an inch. And then you can see that it's a little bit, it's actually quite a bit bigger than what the wire is. So you wind it tight, but then it's going to unwind and then spring back, and then you want to end up at about 1/4 of an inch on the OD. So that's why it's a little bit of a guessing game, as the kind of spring wire that you've got can change that a little bit. But we ended up good with that one. And then I take it to the belt sander on both of them, and I just grind the end of it just a little bit flat, just so that it'll set flat. You don't want a sharp edge there on the end. So this is the first exhaust spring that I tried to wind, and you can see that it ended up way too big. So that was this end of the mandrel that I had, and you can see the spring back there. So that ended up way too big. The wire diameter was good, but then I ended up turning the other end of the mandrel. Both ends was the same size. I ended up turning this one down to about 200 thousandths, and then changed the thread pitch out again, because we need 12 coils over 1.125 inches, which ended up at like 10.6 pitch, but I just rounded that to 11. So we set that to 11 and then wound this spring, and then did the same thing, ground the ends of it flat there so that it'll set down good. But I think these springs will work. So you can wind a spring and then sort of measure it, get an idea of where you're at, and go determine whether you need to go bigger or smaller with your mandrel. So let's get these installed and see how they're going to look. So we'll get the intake valve in there, and then put the spring on. And then put the keeper on. Push that down enough to get our pin in. So you can see there how it holds it up. That feels about right. Like I say, you want it pretty soft on the intake spring, because there's not a rocker arm that opens it. It's just suction that pulls that down. So that feels good. So same idea with the exhaust spring. But the next thing we need to do is get these seats cut into this cylinder head, and you can see that I've kind of marked it out there roughly where we're going to go. So to do that, we're going to use this cutter here, and I made this when I built the Upshur vertical single engine. I'll show you in the plans there what it calls for on the cutter. So it's got a pilot in it, and then this is 3/16, so we'll machine that at a 45-degree angle, and then I put it in the end mill and machined off these sides here. That's a 1/8 of an inch max. So then that creates your two cutting edges, and then this has back relief on it. So from your cutting edge, you need to relieve it back both directions so that you end up with two cutting edges opposite. And then this pilot just happened to be the same size that we're making for these valves, so this will fit into the valve guide. So that's this tool that I made here, and then you can see the color on it. I did heat it up and try to harden it some. And generally I've just turned this by hand so far. You could run it in a drill, but it works pretty good just to do it by hand. So that'll go in there, pile it into there, and then cut this seat. So that's the next thing we'll do, is get both of these seats cut into the cylinder head, and then I'll bring you back and then we'll talk about what we need to do to get these valves lapped in to the seats, and then we'll check the seal on them and see how it's sealing. Okay, so I got the seats cut. That went really good. That cutter does an excellent job. And it doesn't take much. Just apply pressure down and twist. Try not to go side to side. The pilot and the valve guide there will keep it pretty straight. So that all looks good. So the next thing we need to do is lap the valves in to their respective. At this point, you need to decide which one is going to be the intake and which one is going to be the exhaust, because once you lap it in, you want to keep that valve in the hole that you lapped it to. So I've got this one as the exhaust valve and this one as the intake valve. So we need to lap that into there just to get a good seal. So in the past, I've had some trouble with this, and originally I started using this Permatex. There's a couple of different brands that make it. This is valve grinding compound, and this stuff works good on like a regular size cast iron head, but the grit is just way too big. It's way too aggressive for these type model engines, especially if you, on some of the engines, it was an aluminum head, and that is just way too aggressive for the aluminum. It would leave kind of big swirl marks in there, and I never could get the valves to seal. And that head, I actually ended up boring it out and putting brass valve seats into it, and it was still too aggressive for that. I did get some of this VersaGuard. There's a fine and a coarse, and this fine does okay. It's grease, it's silicon carbide mixed with grease, but it's still pretty aggressive. So after a lot of looking around and looking at different options and some different research, what I come up with, and I've covered this in the past, there's these grits here that you can buy, and this is for polishing stones. So you put stones in the tumbler that tumbles them. Completely different application than what I'm using it for. So there's four different grits. And this is silicon carbide particles. There's a 6090 that you start with, which I just skip altogether because those particles are pretty big, so we don't use this one. The next size down is a fine powder, which is a good place to start. And then after that, there's a pre-polish, which is even finer. And then there's a 12,000 extreme polish, which is extremely fine, almost like flour. But this actually works really good because it's not going to leave the big deep swirl grooves in there. So this stuff is just loose powder. So what I did is got 3 different containers, and we'll mix up some more here. So I've got kind of start, medium, and then the finish. And then I'll just mix this with a little bit of oil. I actually use 3-in-1 oil, and just kind of get the consistency to a nice kind of paste. You don't want it too thin, but you need it thick enough that it'll actually stick to the valve. So I'll put a little bit more powder and a little bit more oil in here. Take a wooden stick and stir this. So we'll start with this grip. We'll put it in there, and then to hold it, so we put the exhaust valve in here. And then it sticks through on the back side. So then I'll just take a pin vise and clamp pin vise onto the valve stem there. Just leave a little bit of room so that you can lift the valve up, clamp that on there, and then we're gonna just gently pull, pull down on it and twist, kind of a back and forth motion like that, and then I'll turn it like 180 degrees and just keep doing that and lift it up a little bit and keep spinning it and keep working that down. And then once you do the first grip, then I'll take and clean that completely off, and then we'll go to the second grip, do the same thing, and then we'll go to the third grip and do the same thing, and then look at it. And you might have to look at it under a microscope in between each different grip to see what kind of pattern you're getting, and I'll show you once we get it lapped in. But you want a nice, it should be a dull gray. You'll see a pattern where this valve is contacting the seat there, and then you want to make sure that it's consistent 360 degrees all the way around to make sure that it's sealing good. If it's not 360 degrees, then you need to look at it and see what is wrong. If something's crooked, you can also spin the valve and look at it and see if it wobbles up and down, or if you get a gap as you spin it around, and that means something is not concentric, either concentric or possibly the head of the valve is bent to the stem. But we'll get some more grinding compound mixed up and get both of these valves lapped in. Okay, I got the valves lapped in. That all went pretty good. So I got some pictures, maybe you can see a little bit better with the ring kind of around the valve where it lapped in. You should see a dark surface there, a dark circular ring where it laps in. So to check it with, we want to put some kind of fluid on here and put a little bit of air in here just to see if there's any leaks around here. So I like to use oil. It kind of stays on there, doesn't run off if you use something thinner. So we'll take our blower here and just put a little bit of air in there. Looks good. Now if you blow hard enough, it will try to lift. This is on the intake, so the spring is kind of weak. It will try to lift that. If you blow hard enough, you probably will see some bubbles. And then we'll try it on the exhaust. Same thing, put a little bit of oil on there. And if you do get bubbles and it is leaking, then you'll need to try lapping the valves in again. You might not have to go back all the way to the coarsest grit. Looking good there. So if it is, like I say, if it is leaking, then you'll need to lap it in again and just keep doing that and testing it until you get this to seal. It absolutely is critical that these seal. It's probably the hardest thing to do, in my opinion, building a hit and miss engine, is getting the valves to seal. And if these don't seal, and especially if you don't find out until after you've got the engine together, it's very frustrating because it won't start, and you'll have to tear it apart and lap them again. I know this from experience. So the last thing that we want to check, we're going to go ahead and bolt the head on. And I've got the spark plug in here. I've got it tightened down. So we want to just double check to make sure that we've got compression with this head on. And that will also tell us that our valves are sealing up. If we don't have compression now, then it likely won't want to run, and it'll be a problem down the road. So you want to make sure that you've got compression at this point. So we'll snug these bolts up here. We got the springs in there. Everything should be sealed up. Those are snugged up now. So we want to rotate this from bottom dead center, and that's what we want, is a little bit of a bounce. You can see how the flywheels go in reverse. That means we've got compression. So if you don't have that bounce when you spin these flywheels, then you need to work on the valve seal likely some more. If you can blow air in here and try to find where the leak is in case it's not the valve seals, but it's more than likely the valve seals if you got the head good and flat and a good seal there. If you did suspect that, you could put some oil or something around this surface here to see if it's leaking, or down here around the plug. But the plug and the head should be sealed up, and then the valves should be sealed up ideally. So that's got good compression, so I'm happy with that. I feel like that'll definitely run. The other thing you can check is when you're at top dead center, and if we spin it real fast, you probably can't see it, but you can hear it. You can hear this intake valve open. You can hear the little suction. So you want to make sure that it's sealing enough to make suction to pull the fuel in. You can also put your finger over the exhaust or the intake here, and you can actually feel it creating a suction on your finger. And then if you open the valves, it should spin real free. You don't have that bounce back. Close the valve, and it's sealed up again. So I'm happy with all that. The valves are sealed up. That's, like I say, one of the hardest things to do. I think building a small model engine is getting those valves to seal. So I think that's going to do it for this episode. Next time we'll just continue working our way on down. So we're going to start on this rocker arm for the exhaust here, and then we'll work our way on down back towards the crankshaft. Thanks for watching.